Welcome to Talk Travel with Heather Tate, North Mississippi's podcast for savvy travelers. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is a weekly podcast that airs every Monday on the Shark 102.3 FM radio station based in Ripley, Mississippi, and is then released as a podcast. Travel advisor and travel enthusiast Heather Tate of Whimsical Destinations gives listeners expert travel tips curated through the years of personal and professional experience. By clicking subscribe, you'll have a new travel tip to add to your collection delivered to your podcast library every Monday. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is brought to you by Sun Bear Studio. Sun Bear Studio is a boutique recording studio in the heart of Ripley, Mississippi. When you record with us at Sun Bear Studio, we can mix, master, register, and publish your music, your podcast, or your family story. Email us when you're ready at sunbear@jc.media.
This program was recorded at Sun Bear Studio in Ripley, Mississippi.
Good morning, Northeast Mississippi travelers. This is Heather with Talk Travel with Heather Tate, and I am so excited to share my adventures and tried and true tips with you. Whether you are also a seasoned traveler, a hopeful traveler, or currently an armchair traveler, meaning you're going to follow along with us from home for now. This is our 97th episode of Talk Travel with Heather Tate. And it's also been a month since I went to St. Lucia with my best friend, Mallory, safely. So what I wanted to do this week was to share a recap of that. I know I've done a full episode of St. Lucia as a destination. And if you haven't listened to that, it'd be great to go back and listen to that after this. But I just want to give a recap of what our weekend looked like, what we did, why we went, what I recommend, and that sort of thing. So this idea came from me last year when I had a client who was going to be a bride and a destination wedding choose St. Lucia. And it turned out we were going to have a big group, like over 30 people go. And I thought maybe this is something that I should actually go to as well. Most of my destination weddings are smaller and I haven't needed to go on site to actually be there. But this one, with the number of people, I thought maybe I should go. And it happened to fall the weekend after my best friend Mallory's 40th birthday. So then I started thinking, like, well, maybe we could make it a girls' trip. I just turned 40 in December. She turned 40 in April. I was like, it could be our joint 40th birthday trip. So I was like, maybe I'll just mention it to her and see if that's something that she would like to do. Well, it took me about 30 seconds of explaining it. Mallory was already on board. So we are very grateful that our husbands held down the fort for us and, made sure that the kids got to where they needed to be, all their end of school programs and activities. And we decided we would plan for this trip. We were only going to go for 4 days and 3 nights. So, we weren't blocking off a whole week, but when you're a mom and you're getting away from your kids, sometimes 3 nights can feel like a week for sure. But we realized that we had not spent a night alone together since we had been in college when we were roommates. And we were so excited, not only for going to one of my favorite places on earth, and it was going to be Mallory's first time to go to St. Lucia, but that we were going to get to have this time where we could really just be together and talk and catch up and, sleep late if we wanted to, have room service breakfast. And we had all of these ideas for what we wanted to do. And I know for me personally, it lived up to everything that I wanted for our trip and more. So we decided, because she lives 2 hours outside of Atlanta, that I was going to meet her at her house and that we were going to drive down to Atlanta the night before. So that way we could leave nonstop. If you want to go nonstop to the Caribbean, Atlanta is going to be your closest place to fly out of most of the time for Jamaica, the Bahamas, St. Lucia. So we decided we were flying Delta nonstop. We were going to drive down the night before. So we would be right there at the airport 3 hours before our flight was leaving. We were sitting in the Starbucks inside the airport. Mallory was a trooper about it. She's like, I think this is really early. I'm like, I am used to Logan wanting to be at the airport 4 and 5 hours before we leave. So I was channeling my inner Logan this trip, and I was the one having us sitting right at the Starbucks 3 hours early, but Mallory didn't complain one bit. We just had our coffees and we were excited to start our trip. So when we got to St. Lucia, we had no issues whatsoever flying. We ended up getting to sit together. It was so much fun because there was no one sitting beside me. When I booked my seats, we didn't have our seats together. And so when I got on the plane, there was no one sitting in the 2 seats beside me. And I asked our flight attendant if if my best friend could join me. And she's like, no, you just have to see her in St. Lucia. I was like, okay. And she's like, I'm just kidding. Have her come on up. So Mallory got to join me. We had the best 4-hour flight. We watched movies. We were reading our books. And when we arrived, we had a private transfer to the resort. Now, it takes about an hour and a half to get to the north part of the island from the airport. And it's a lot of windy roads. And I had warned Mallory, but if you get any type of motion sickness when you go to St. Lucia, you're going to want to take some medication to make that easier for you. So she did, but it was still very winding. The great thing about having a private car is that we could stop when we needed to stop. And so there's a beautiful overlook. Our driver was wonderful. His name was David. He stopped, and not only did he tell us all about things in the island that was mango season, things that we shouldn't miss out on, but he would stop so we could take some pictures along the way. It was raining a little bit, but he said that it was such a great thing that it was raining because the island really needed it. They hadn't had a lot of rain in weeks, and so that's the first rain they'd had. So that's a really good perspective to start off your trip, knowing then that, okay, when it rains and you're in paradise, you're like, oh, this is really raining on my beach day. But when you think about the island and how much they need the rain and how it's good for everyone, it puts it in a different perspective. We're like, you know what? The sun's going to come out. It'll come out eventually, and it did. The next day was absolutely gorgeous, which was our entire relaxing beach day, enjoying being outside. So it worked out perfectly, but it was a really good reminder of that. By the time we got to our room, which we went all out. It was our 40th birthday. So you're only turning 40 once, right? So we had a 2-story villa with butlers. We had a private pool. We had a huge spa-like bathroom with walk-in shower and a soaking tub. It was incredible. And we had about 15 minutes to enjoy it, to have a glass of champagne. Fortunately, our butlers had snacks for us when we arrived. We had a cheese charcuterie plate with fruit and crackers and bread, and we scarf that down very quickly because we were going to be hopping on a shuttle to take the 30 to 40 minute ride to go over to the Grand St. Lucia. We were staying at Sandals Latok, and my wedding party was mostly staying at the Grand, and we wanted to be there to meet everyone. I was going to introduce myself to my bride and groom and all of her guests, and we're like, we'll be there in time for the cocktail hour. Well, what I did not account for was that it was the day after their holiday of Labor Day, even though we were there May 2nd through the 5th. Their Labor Day is May 1st. So different days observe Labor Day for different countries. So it's not September like we have. So it was very crowded. And what we thought was going to be a 40-minute easy transfer or less ended up being an hour and a half. So we got there about 5 minutes before the cocktail party ended. So we got there in time to see the sunset over the mountains in the bay, which is beautiful. I got to catch up with my bride and my groom, introduce myself in person after having planned their wedding for almost a year in advance, always on the phone or in text messages and emails. So that was fun. But we were a little flustered that it took so long. And we learned then that with traffic, depending on what time you go, it's going to take longer for the transfers. So the whole next day was our truly relaxing day. And we did not leave our villa until like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We had room service breakfast. We enjoyed our pool. We read our books out on our patio chairs. We had room service lunch. Our butlers, I think, probably thought we weren't ever going to leave, but we had to get ready because we were going to do a sunset catamaran, and we wanted to leave earlier so we would miss the traffic. So that's what we ended up doing for our second day. I actually, when we were picking out outfits, I remembered this beautiful pink tree at Sandals Latok when I had gone years ago. And I matched my dress to what I remember the tree looking like. And so we took pictures in front of like all sorts of beautiful hibiscus trees and different kinds of floral, just beautiful overlooks of the ocean. So we took our pictures because we are both women who love to take pictures. I love traveling with Mallory because I don't have to ask her like, will you take a picture of me doing such and such? She's already snapping that picture and I'm already snapping that picture of her. So it worked out great for us. We're the photographers in our family. And so when you have two photographers traveling together, we have a lot of pictures. So if you haven't seen any of those, go over to our Facebook group, Heather and Logan Tate, Whimsical Destinations, and just type in St. Lucia, and you're going to see a lot of pictures from the last month there. I have so much more to tell you about our trip, but that's all the time we have for this week on the radio show. If you want to hear more, tune over to our podcast where you're going to have the extended version. That's it for this edition of Talk Travel with Heather Tate. Tune in every Monday at 11 a.m. to turn your travel dreams into travel plans. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion for an interview or for access to this interview, go to our website, shark1023.com, and click on the podcast podcast tab. This interview can also be found on Apple, Google, and Amazon Podcast. Keep it tuned to the Shark 1023 and start planning your next trip. Okay, I'm back. So we were getting ready to go to our catamaran cruise. It's going to be a sunset catamaran cruise. We get there to the Grand, and the catamaran pulls up right at the dock of the resort. So we didn't have to leave again. We were going straight from the resort. And it was a private catamaran just for my wedding party that was celebrating that weekend. That's such a fun thing to do if you're doing a destination wedding or a big group trip, to have a private catamaran, because then we had music, there were some snacks, there were drinks, and we were sailing around Pigeon Island, which is a very beautiful and historic part of the island. St. Lucia actually changed hands between the British and the French 10 times. So this is a destination that was fought over, and it's easy to see why when you're there in person and see just how beautiful it is. St. Lucia needs to be seen from the water. So when you go, as beautiful as the island itself is, you're not going to get to take full advantage unless you get on a boat and at least see part of it. We did not get to go to the Pitons this trip because that's going to be further south. Instead, we went around Pigeon Island, enjoyed the sunset, and cruised for a couple hours. But Mallory's going to get to go when she goes back, because she knows she's going to go back to St. Lucia. It's one of those places that you go one time, you're going to have to go again. So I'm excited for her to get it to go on a return trip and bring her husband with her. And so then they'll get to go to the Pitons then. So we didn't do another excursion because it was a short trip. And we had the wedding the following day, that Saturday. And so getting to go on the catamaran cruise, we're like, this will be our excursion. We're actually going to enjoy our resort, enjoy our villa, and use that time where we can just rest and enjoy the views, catch up. While we were reading our books, drinking our cocktails, there happened to be all these hummingbirds that would come right to where we were, and they were drinking from the hibiscus. So it was amazing. We got some videos of that too. The wedding day was beautiful. The weather held out perfectly, and it was in the overwater chapel that is located at the Grand St. Lucian. So it was a beautiful day, beautiful location, and we had a lot of fun. The guests were wonderful and were very welcoming and invited us to be there, and we joined them for the cocktail hour afterwards. But after that, we bid our guests, adieu, and decided that we were going to spend our last full night at our resort at Sandals Latok. So when we went, we decided that we were going to get sushi because we had sushi the other 2 nights. That didn't mean we didn't eat at other restaurants. We did. We had Italian, we had French, but we would start each night off with having sushi at the Grand. Well, we had not been to the Soy, which is the sushi restaurant at Latok. And even though I had been to St. Lucia twice before, I had not eaten at the sushi restaurant Latok either. So I've been to almost every Sandals resort now. I'm only missing one. That's Curacao. I hope to go there later this year. But we decided, you know what? We'll go have the sushi at Soy here. And here was one of our biggest surprises of the entire trip. What I did not know is that this Soy was open air. So when we went, we just walked down from our villa to the restaurant. When we walked in, it was half indoors, half outdoors. Like there was a partial roof, but it was open to the outside. And when you sat at the sushi bar, behind our sushi chefs, there was a full, long window with no glass. It was open, and you were right at the beach because the restaurant juts out over the beach and the water. So it felt like we were hanging over the edge looking at the water. It is one of the most stunning views I've ever had at any restaurant. And even though we were eating sushi like we'd had the other 2 nights, it was a completely different experience. So those moments in a trip, even though Mallory and I are both super planners, those moments that you don't expect to happen, like that you didn't plan for. They said the surprises were like, that was one of our favorite parts of the trip. The other surprise I knew about, but Mallory didn't. And I wanted to surprise her with a floating breakfast tray for breakfast our last morning. And that's exactly what we did. We're like, normally I don't get in a pool or the ocean the day that I'm flying out because you've got swimsuits that you want to dry the day before. But I thought, you know what? It's a short trip. We're going to make the most of every moment. And so that's how we had our breakfast, our last morning. We didn't have to leave early. We had until 11 o'clock before we needed to get ready to leave for the airport. So we had a relaxing morning in and got to enjoy our floating breakfast tray. So the biggest gift that we could have given each other for our 40th birthdays was spending time together. You have your lifetime best friends that when you're an adult and you live in different places, or even if you live in the same place, but you have work, you have families, you have so many obligations, you don't always get to make time for each other. Sometimes it means you're going to see each other at a holiday, but it could be, or in a restaurant, you make time to go out to eat, lunch once a month or a couple times a year. But it's not the same as the quality time that can come from a trip, even a short trip. I will say the 3-night or 4-day trip felt like so much longer than it was in a good way, because we had uninterrupted time to really talk. Just like we used to when we were in college, when we had all the time in the world. We could stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning and talk and dream. And if you have that best friend that you get together with every once in a while, you find yourselves always talking about your past, right? Like when you get to be a certain age, like I said, I'm 40 now. You talk about the good old days when you were in high school, when you were in college, what you did then. Or you talk about your kids, you talk about your husbands, you talk about your careers, what you're doing in the community, your activities. But you don't always get new memories together. Like you feel like sometimes you're always just, in a way, reminiscing about the past. Not that that's wrong. I love our reminiscing and talking about, things that we did and where we thought we would be versus where we are now. But what I love then is, like, from this trip, we now have new memories to talk about. We're not just talking about things from 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago even. We're talking about things that just happened. So you get to make new memories. So take that girls' trip with your best friend. Celebrate a milestone birthday. Celebrate an achievement. Maybe one or both of you. Maybe it's going to be a group. Maybe it's not just a one-on-one trip. Maybe you can go with a group of friends. And I've done trips like that before too, where we've had multiple friends go, and that's wonderful as well. But if you can only get away with just the two of you, then do that. So maybe you're celebrating an achievement. Maybe it's a bachelorette party. Maybe you're celebrating a wonderful diagnosis. Maybe there was a health scare. Maybe it's something that your best friend has just battled and has come out on the other end, and you want to celebrate them for that. Maybe your friend has lost a dear loved one, whether it's a spouse, a parent, a sibling, and you want to show that you're there for them. And a card is wonderful, but being in person and having time to dedicate to each other is going to be even more powerful. Maybe you just want to simply reconnect. You feel like you haven't seen each other or caught up with each other more than just on Facebook or Instagram. That's the danger with social media. As wonderful as it can be. And I love social media. I use it all the time. If you're on my Facebook group, you know that I'm on social media. But sometimes it makes us have a false sense of connection. Right? Like we feel like we know everything about that person because we see what they're doing. But it's not the same as experiencing those things with the person. Getting to see them behind the scenes, right? No filters, no carefully edited pictures, right? That only show your flattering side. You get to really see all angles of someone when you travel with them. And I know that for me, this trip has made me feel even more reconnected with my best friend. And it's reminded me that this is something I want to share with all of you. If you've ever thought about traveling with your best friend and you just haven't made a time, make a time. It may not be something you can do spur of the moment. We have been planning this since last year. So it's going to take, especially if you have kids, you have jobs, you have obligations, your husbands, other things that you've got to make sure you're taking care of, your pets, all these different things. You may not be able to do last minute, but you can start planning now for next year. So think about who you would want to go on a girls' trip with. Who do you want to reconnect? Maybe it's your mom. Maybe it's your adult daughter or your sister. I have so many sister trips planned for this year that I'm really excited for my guests. That's the time they're going. Their husbands don't love traveling as much as they do. And that happens. Women, I think as a whole, we like to travel more. My husband loves to travel. He does. But I will say, honestly, as much as Logan likes to travel, I like to travel even more than he likes to travel, which means then I can do a back-to-back trip. I can go from a girls' trip in St. Lucia to a week later, I am packing for my anniversary trip to St. Vincent, which I'm going to have coming up in a couple of weeks and episodes I'm going to share with you. But we're going to transition now. And, I thank you for letting me talk to you so much about the importance I feel of traveling with a friend. And next week, we're going to talk about couple travel and anniversary trips. So that's all the time we have. I could talk to you guys for forever about this. You know how much I love it, how passionate I am about sharing my adventures for the reason that I hope it inspires you to take your own adventure. Life is short. Make those memories. Take the trip. You won't regret it.
This show is made possible by JC Media, LLC in Ripley, Mississippi. JC Media owns the Shark 102.3 Classic Rock FM radio station where the show is hosted, and Sun Bear Recording Studio where the interviews are recorded. We need your feedback and support. If you listen to the podcast on a player like iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Amazon Music, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That email is theshark1023@gmail.com. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite app or stream episodes online at shark1023.com/podcasts. Today's episode was produced by Melinda Marsalis. It was edited by Rick Williams and engineered by Chris Marsalis. The podcast technician is Joyce Grady.